Have you ever prayed and felt as if your words disappeared into silence? Moments when pain is real, the night feels endless, and God seems far away, even though your heart still calls his name. This prayer is for the soul that feels abandoned, misunderstood, or broken, yet still dares to cry out to God. Stay until the end, because this psalm reveals that silence is never the end of the story, and that suffering can give birth to redemption. Welcome to Daily Prayer, your moment to breathe, reflect, and reconnect with God. Take a slow, trembling breath. You don't need to be strong here. You don't need to hide your pain. This is a sacred space where honesty is allowed, where tears can become prayer, and where even unanswered cries are heard. If this moment brings comfort to your heart, allow yourself to like and turn on notifications, so this refuge of prayer is always here when darkness feels heavy. Psalm 22 begins where many prayers dare not start, with anguish, with a question that rises from the deepest place of the soul, a cry that does not try to sound faithful, but tries to survive, a cry that asks, "Where are you, God, when I need you most?" David gives voice to a pain that feels unbearable. He speaks of praying day and night, of calling out without hearing an answer, of feeling distant from the very God he trusts. This is not the prayer of someone who has lost faith. It is the prayer of someone whose faith is being stretched to its limit. And this is why Psalm 22 matters so deeply, because it tells us that faith can exist alongside despair, that trust can live inside questions. That crying out does not mean turning away. Sometimes it is the last act of belief we have left. Maybe today you feel like God is far from your prayers, like your words echo back unanswered, like night after night passes without relief. This psalm meets you there. David reminds us that even when God feels distant, he remains holy. Even when the present feels unbearable, God's faithfulness in the past still stands. He remembers generations who cried out and were delivered. He clings to memory when the moment feels too painful to endure. This is the tension of the psalm: pain and remembrance, silence and faith, suffering and hope existing together. David feels humiliated, mocked, and rejected. He describes being scorned, misunderstood, and treated as worthless. His pain is not only physical, it is emotional, social, and spiritual. He feels stripped of dignity, exposed, alone. And yet, even in this depth, he continues to speak to God. That alone is powerful, because when everything else falls away, reputation, strength, certainty, prayer remains, a fragile thread connecting a wounded soul to a faithful God. As this prayer unfolds, we will descend even deeper into the suffering, into abandonment, injustice, and agony. But we will also begin to see something extraordinary: how God is present even when he feels absent, and how suffering can carry a promise hidden within it. Stay with me. What comes next leads us into the heart of the pain, and reveals why this psalm does not end in despair, but in hope that reaches far beyond the darkness. The prayer now moves deeper into the pain, into the place where suffering is no longer just felt, but endured. David's words become heavier, more raw. He no longer speaks only of silence, but of humiliation, of being seen and mocked, of becoming an object of scorn rather than compassion. He feels watched, judged, and ridiculed by those around him, their words cut as deeply as any wound. Maybe you know this pain, the pain of being misunderstood, of being judged while you are already breaking, of being told that if God truly cared, he would have acted by now. David feels exposed, stripped of dignity, reduced to something small and powerless in the eyes of others. His suffering is not hidden, it is public, and that makes it even harder to bear. Yet in the middle of this humiliation, something unexpected happens. David remembers. He remembers that his story did not begin with pain, that before rejection, there was care. Before mockery, there was protection. He recalls a God who was present from the very beginning, a God who watched over him in vulnerability, who sustained him when he had no strength of his own. This memory becomes a lifeline. When the present feels unbearable, David reaches back to the truth that God has never abandoned him completely. Even if God feels distant now, he was faithful before, and that faithfulness matters. This is not denial of pain, it is resistance to despair. David does not pretend that suffering is smaller than it is. He describes it vividly. He feels surrounded by forces that threaten to devour him. He's pressed in from every side. Fear tightens its grip. Weakness spreads through his body. His strength drains away. The imagery becomes intense because the experience is intense. There are moments when suffering feels all-consuming, when the body feels fragile, when the heart feels like it might give way, when life itself seems to be slipping through your fingers. And David speaks directly from that place. He does not sanitize his pain. He does not soften his language. He does not rush to hope too quickly. Instead, he stays present in the suffering and brings it honestly before God. This is where Psalm 22 becomes deeply sacred, because it shows us that God allows us to come to him not only with praise, but with agony, not only with certainty, but with confusion, not only with faith-filled declarations, but with desperate cries. David does not let go of God even when he feels like God has let go of him. That tension is painful, but it is also powerful, because it means that prayer does not end when answers are delayed. It continues. It persists. It clings. And as the suffering reaches its most intense point, as David feels surrounded, weakened, and exposed, something shifts quietly beneath the surface. The cry for help becomes more urgent. The plea for nearness becomes sharper. The prayer moves toward a breaking point, not of faith, but of transformation. Stay with me. What comes next carries us into the deepest moment of suffering and prepares the way for a turn that changes everything. The suffering now reaches its deepest point. David's pain is no longer only emotional or social. It becomes physical, consuming, exhausting. His strength drains away. His body feels fragile. His heart feels heavy, almost unable to keep beating with hope. He describes himself as emptied, poured out, weakened to the core of his being. This is what despair feels like when it settles in the body. There are moments when pain is no longer something you think about, it becomes something you live inside. Breathing feels heavy. The future feels unreachable. The present feels unbearable. David speaks from that place. He feels surrounded by hostility, by forces that seem cruel and relentless. He feels watched as he suffers, exposed in his vulnerability, stripped of dignity. Others look on without compassion. Some even find satisfaction in his pain, and still, he speaks to God. This is the most haunting part of the prayer, because even when strength is gone, even when dignity feels lost, even when the soul feels pressed to its limits, David does not stop calling out. His prayer becomes a plea not for explanation, but for presence. Do not be far from me. That is the heart of this moment. Not answers, not reasons, not immediate relief. Just nearness. There are seasons when that is all the soul can ask for. When understanding feels impossible, but abandonment feels unbearable. When pain has stripped everything away except the need for God to be close, David feels as if death itself is approaching, as if life is slipping through his hands, and yet his cry grows sharper, more focused. He asks God to intervene, to rescue, to act, to save his life from destruction. This is the breaking point of the psalm, not the breaking of faith, but the breaking open of it. Because in this moment, David's suffering becomes more than personal. It becomes symbolic. It carries a weight that reaches beyond one life, one story, one moment. It reflects the suffering of the innocent, the anguish of the righteous, the pain of those who trust God and yet experience deep affliction. This is why Psalm 22 echoes through history, because it speaks to every soul that has felt abandoned, every heart that's cried out in pain, every life that has suffered unjustly. And yet, even here, even at the lowest point, something extraordinary begins to stir. The cry does not disappear into silence. The suffering does not have the final word. The darkness does not consume the story. There is a shift coming, not sudden, not loud, but certain. The prayer is about to turn from agony to testimony, from isolation to proclamation, from death-shadowed silence to hope that reaches generations yet unborn. Stay with me. What comes next transforms suffering into redemption and pain into a promise that will not be forgotten. And now, something miraculous happens. The voice that cried out in agony begins to change. The prayer that once echoed with pain now carries a different tone, not because the suffering was small, but because it was not ignored. David realizes that God did not despise his affliction, that his cries were not wasted, that his suffering was seen, heard, and held, even when silence made it feel otherwise. This is the turning point. The one who felt abandoned now speaks with assurance. The one who was surrounded now proclaims hope. The one who was brought low now lifts his voice again. David understands that God's presence was never truly absent. It was hidden, working beyond what could be perceived in the moment. And now, the pain gives way to testimony. He begins to speak not only for himself, but for others. He declares that what he has experienced will be shared, that suffering will not be the final chapter, that God's faithfulness deserves to be proclaimed among brothers, among the assembly, among generations. This is redemption. Pain transformed into purpose. Agony turned into proclamation. Suffering reshaped into hope. David sees beyond his own story. He envisions the hungry being fed, the broken being restored, hearts remembering God and turning back to him not only nearby, but across the earth, across nations, across time. This is no longer just a personal prayer. It becomes a promise. A promise that God's kingdom is larger than any single moment of suffering, that his reign extends beyond pain, beyond injustice, beyond death itself, that those who feel forgotten will not remain so forever. David understands that even those who lie in the dust, even those who feel near the end, are not beyond God's reach. Life continues because God sustains it. Hope survives because God preserves it. And the story does not end with him. He speaks of generations yet to come, of people not yet born who will hear about God's righteousness, about what God has done, about how suffering did not have the final word. This is where Psalm 22 finds its rest. Not in the removal of scars, but in their meaning. Not in the erasing of pain, but in its transformation. Not in silence, but in testimony. And this truth gently reaches us now. If you are in pain today, know this: God sees you. If you feel abandoned, know this: God has not turned his face away. If your suffering feels meaningless, know this: God is still writing the story. You may not see the ending yet. You may still be in the middle of the cry. But redemption is not canceled by silence. Take a deep breath. Let hope settle quietly in your heart. What feels like the end may become the beginning of a testimony that reaches far beyond you. If this prayer spoke to your soul, share it with someone who feels lost in their suffering. Someone who needs to know that God still hears, still redeems, and still turns pain into purpose. And remember, daily prayer is always here for you. A place to cry honestly, to wait faithfully, and to discover that even in the darkest moments, God is still at work. May your heart hold on. May your hope remain alive. And may your story, like David's, one day declare, "The Lord has done this."